And Stephanie and I have not met until today, but I'm very excited to have the opportunity to engage with you, Stephanie. Longtime admirer of your contributions. I think your name is synonymous with data visualization. It's come to be anyway for many people. You've got a wonderful website, training regime put together, some great books as resources, and you're internationally well known. I'm going to turn it over to you now, and you can introduce yourself a little bit more. And we look forward to this really great learning opportunity. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Brad. I'm really glad to be here. It's so good to see so many of your faces. I don't want to spend a lot of time introducing myself. I'm going to actually spend the time showing you what I do. And I'm very, very excited for what I'm going to do today, because we are going to tear apart Brad's charts. And I'm so thrilled. He volunteered for this. So in the process of tearing apart his charts, let's just always keep in mind that it takes some bravery and courage to put your stuff out there for other people to rip apart. So let's just start by giving Brad a round of applause, like give him the hand clap emoji, or if you have a camera on, yes, he deserves it. And now I'm going to mute you so that you can't talk anymore. Okay. Thank you so much, Brad. Okay. And keep that in mind, because I'm going to ask you to give feedback on what you think he should improve when we look at some of his charts. And I've been told the grad students that are on the line tend to be kind of quiet, but listen, this is a moment when fortune favors the bold. Okay. So when we're looking at his stuff, do not hesitate to go into the chat and type in a suggestion that you would have for improvement. All right. And here's why I want you to really be okay with this. Not only has he okayed it, but I want to show you the data that we're going to be looking at here. All right. I'm going to share my screen. So this comes from a report, a publication that Brad is working on. It is a publication about his publications. All right. So I got no sympathy, because like so many of us are trying hard to get like one thing published. You have a publication about publications. That's what we're going to dig into today. So don't hold back. No sympathy here. We're going to start out with, there are 3 graphs in here that I want us to look at, and then we're going to remake live, like as we go with your input. So let me get into the document here. I want us to start with figure 9.4. And like many of the publications that you create, there are placeholders for the figure in the document. So we can see it right here. There's lots of text that's describing what's going on. We even have text in here describing the chart. Like there's a peak in 2012 and a final peak occurred in 2001. And then there's insert here. And then the actual chart itself is going to be way back here. All right. So yeah, take a look at this and type in one suggestion that you would have to improve this. And we're going to keep in mind that this is going for publication. Okay, we won't forget that. And all the suggestions that we're going to do should be fine to be published. But start me off in the chat. Give me one thing that you would tweak about this to make it a little bit better. It's okay if you don't feel like you have many answers. That's why I'm here. I'm going to tell you some things. But remember, fortune favors the bold, and he said this is okay. All right, Yasmin is starting us off with remove the grid lines and the axis and add the data points to the chart. Cool, that would be good. Clear out the background of the graph. Yes, Fabiana, exactly. Remove those background lines, right, Jennifer, and the color. Yeah, like that pattern background in there, we don't need that. Yukun said, show the peak numbers. Exactly, we're talking about that in the paragraph that's associated with the figure, right? So it would make sense to actually show those peak numbers. Maybe combine some of these, maybe just change the chart type. I like data points on the chart itself too, Marianne said. Okay, cool. So we're going to open this up in the Excel file, and we're going to start to make some of these changes. So for sure, I'm with you. We're doing this all inside Excel too, and this is recorded. So I am going to be going through these changes pretty quickly, but you can always go back and review the recording later, okay? So for sure, we want to get rid of this background gradient that's going on here. It's not doing any favors, Brad. So I'm going to just right click in that space and say format plot area. That's going to open up this format menu on the side of the screen here. And inside fill, we're just going to say no fill. We're going to just leave this blank, all right? And I'm going to click out of the chart because I want you to see something. Do you notice how it has a border around the chart. That's actually not ideal. So it's a default thing that Excel adds in, but ultimately this is going to go inside that publication where it's going to be on a white page surrounded by a bunch of words. And we want that like empty space in the background of the chart to just blend in with the empty space of the page. If you've ever heard a graphic designer talk about how much they love white space, that's what they mean. It doesn't necessarily have to be white. They're just talking about all that empty space just like blends together and it's not chopped up by borders or funky backgrounds or things that aren't necessary. So I'm going to click on the chart border and I'm going to go into format chart area, into border, and I'm going to say no line. Now, do you see any other lines in here? Any other like unnecessary little lines? And unnecessary is the key here. So type into the chat, what would be an unnecessary line? I see a vote for grid lines. Okay, so let's talk about what's unnecessary and what's necessary here. I see people saying grid lines, and there's an argument to be made both ways, but there are definitely some other lines I want to take out. Like I think you can see, and some of you are probably talking about this, that there's like a border around the inner part of the graph here that is green. We don't need that. That's like a plot area border or something. So I'm just going to click on that plot area again, and I'm going to say no line. And then do you see this like blue line over here with these blue ticks? We don't need that either. That's your y-axis line. So I'm clicking on the y-axis number line here and just going over to no line. Okay. So that leaves us with these horizontal grid lines. And here's the deal. These could be argued that they're necessary. And that's why the key word here is what are the unnecessary lines? The necessary lines are ones that aid to our ability to read the data. So if we're going to have a value axis, we really do need to have these grid lines that are coming off of it. If I take them out, it gets really hard to estimate. Like, tell me what the value was in 2019. It's very hard because our eyes can't travel that well. We're just not good eye trackers. So if you're going to keep a value axis, the grid lines have to go with it. They're like a buddy system, okay? Now, you could make an argument that you want data points on each one of these circles. If we right click and say add data labels, we'll see them all on here. I don't know that the exact number every year is actually that critical. Maybe we want to add some data points for the ones that are like the peaks that you had mentioned earlier, but I don't. So either you're going to have data labels, and if you have data labels, you ditch your y-axis and your grid lines, or you don't put data labels on there at all, and you keep your y-axis and your grid lines, but it's one or the other. You wouldn't have your axis, your grid lines, and data labels. That's way too much. So I think for now, we're going to keep the y-axis and the grid lines, although this is a place where you could diverge from what I'm talking about. Sarah said, are these default settings you're changing? So some of them Brad had to do. Like there's not a default setting in Excel that adds in a green pattern background. Brad had to actually make that one happen. Never again, you're actually going to save yourself time because you don't have to worry about doing that. Okay. What else shall we change in here? I think I'd like to change what's happening on the x-axis. When the years are in here like this and they're all tilted, nobody really likes to tilt their head as much as possible. We want to keep all the text completely horizontal. And it's a little difficult to do because you're naming every year and we have all the repetition in there with the first two digits. So it could be possible that we could truncate and just do like apostrophe 98 and apostrophe 99, which is a move you have to do back in the spreadsheet. So I'm here in cell A6. And in Excel, you actually have to do two apostrophes. It's not a quote mark. It's two single apostrophes and then 98. Because Excel is going to ignore the first one, and it'll only show you the second apostrophe. So apostrophe, apostrophe 99, and this next, apostrophe, apostrophe 00. I'm only going to do a few to get the pattern going. Maybe one more. And then if Excel is going to cooperate with me today, it should let me just highlight the last few and drag this down, and then they'll all change for me automatically. So this is better. It saves us a little bit of room down here. It's not perfect yet. And I think that might be because I believe Brad manually changed the settings to make all the text tilt. Let's get that out of here. So I'm clicking inside the x-axis here, and I'm in the format axis menu, and I'm in this third icon. Yeah, see where it says text direction, rotate all text 270 degrees. Brad had to do that. We're not going to do that. We're just going to make it say horizontal. So horizontal is better, easier to read. It kind of looks like the numbers are all crashing together right now. Like there's not a lot of breathing room between each of the years. You see what I mean? So there are a couple things that we can do to handle that. First of all, we could choose a better font, a condensed font. And sometimes your fonts are going to be dictated by the publication. So this is something to watch out for. But the default font in here, Calibri, is kind of a wide font. It takes up a lot of space, so the numbers don't have a lot of breathing room there. But I'm going to choose a condensed font, and I'm actually going to go with, let's just pick something easy like Arial Narrow. Sometimes you can get away with this with a publication because they will allow Arial, and you can be like, well, this is just Arial Narrow. I mean, you can try and see what you can get away with, you know. So we'll pick Arial Narrow. That gives us a lot more room between the years. You can see a little bit more breathing room down there. And you know what? Let's just make it bigger. That is not a problem. Just make it bigger. I would argue that we might not need the markers along the line, these little circles. You could potentially keep them if you want to, but I think what might be cooler, let's take them out for now. I'm going to go into marker options, and I'm going to say none. What if we just add them in on those peaks where Brad is already talking about that point in the article? That could be kind of cool. So if we wanted to label a peak, we'll just click on this one, just that one data point. We'll add the data marker back in, add in that circle, maybe even make that circle a little bit bigger. And then we can add an annotation to it. So the idea here is that we want our chart to be readable on its own. When it eventually moves from the appendix to its rightful place inside the publication, people are going to see it as they're reading the rest of the narrative. And here's the thing, as soon as their eyes turn to the page and there's a picture on the page, their eyes are going to jump to the picture because that's just how our brains are built. So we want that picture to be able to stand on its own and really draw people in, even if they haven't read the associated text that goes with it yet. The idea is that the picture draws them in and then they want to go read the associated text. So it's perfectly fine to add a little bit more meat to your chart, pulling directly from the contents that were in the report earlier on. So we will add a data label here. I'm just going to right click on that point and say add data label. And it's going to add the number. I'm going to right click on it again and say format data label. And I'm going to move it to above. And then I might type in like, we might type in something cool here. We'll pretend this is an annotation that's actually from the report. We'll just copy paste it right into this data label. Now, do you see how the grid line is like running through the data label? That's not super cool, but what you can do is just click into your paint bucket over here and make it a solid fill. If Brad was doing this, he'd make it a pattern, but we're just going to make it white, just a white solid fill so that you don't see the grid line running through that data label anymore. We're also going to take out the axes labels. Now, this could be a place where certain journals are going to push back on you and be like, every axis has to be labeled, but year of publication, okay, I think we know. We're going to delete it. And we're going to delete number of citing articles. But here's what we will do. We're going to use your chart title space, which currently you just have saying n equals 371. And we're going to type in what you said back in the article. So let's go back and find where it said, here we are. So you're saying things in here like, although interest dropped off, another peak was observed in 2007. The final peak occurred in 2001. The chapter continues to be cited in 2022 in 11 published documents so far. So that's what we're going to say for our title here. Okay, I'm not going to type the whole thing because you don't need to watch me type, but you know what you would do here. Then we're going to use the subtitle space. So I just did Shift Enter at the end of my title to bring n equals 371 onto another line. I'm going to left justify that text, and I'm going to make it a little bit smaller because it's sub, and maybe even like a lighter gray. Okay, so I'm going to say n equals 371, comma, and then I'm going to type in what was in the axes titles. So number of citations per in each publication year, something like that. Okay, So everybody now knows the units that are in the chart, which used to be axes titles. But again, one of them was making us tip our head. It's still going to be communicated. We're just going to do it in the subtitle. Ask me questions about this. I'm going to correct my spelling, of course, before this goes to publication. And I might even bold that title too. You really want your title to stand out. That title is going to tell a whole story. It's going to be a sentence that says something about this data that we literally just cut from the paragraph and paste in here. We could use some other annotations in here too. We could mark some of these other peaks if we wanted to. Ask me some questions about this one. Brad's okay. Look at him. He's like, I can handle this. So it's all right. You can ask me questions. You can make further suggestions too. You can ask me about anything that I did here, or you could say, what if we take it one step further and we do blank? Ellison said, is there a max number of words for the title or sentence? I think that's a great question. I usually try to say 6 to 12 words, but so what if you're at 13 or 15, you know, sometimes you just have a lot to say. So I would try for like 2 lines. Excel's automatically going to start popping your text down onto a second line if your title starts to get too long. Don't go to 3 lines. That's just kind of like obnoxious. But if your title is 2 lines, people can handle that. Brad says sometimes publishers require specific caption formats. We need to argue to deviate. And yeah, exactly. And I think you could. I mean, maybe a grad student on the line could not, but Brad, you're you. You should be the one pushing back on the journals because they're going to listen to you. After all, this is a publication about your publications. Like, I think you have some clout that you could be using here to gently suggest that the journals align themselves with what we know about how humans actually read and how humans actually consume information well. For the rest of you who are like grad students not willing to stick your neck out like that, I say follow all the guidelines they want so you don't get rejected, but look for where they don't dictate anything. Like if they don't tell you what your title has to be, you're gonna put your awesome title in there, you know? Look for the things they don't address and walk right through that hole. Can we use more than one color in the title? You could, yeah, you could like highlight a certain word in here or 2 if you wanted to. If you're going to highlight a word in the title, you'd want to make it match the data. So whatever green this is, I'm probably choosing the wrong green there, but you'd want to make that word match the data that's associated with so that people can see how these 2 things are connected. Isabel, would you recommend leaving the line green? Are there more accessible colors you would recommend? So I'm assuming ultimately this is going to be reproduced in black and white, in which case it kind of doesn't matter. I mean, you could just design the whole thing in black and white, you know, make it easy for the journal. If they are going to use color, there's nothing wrong with using green if it's the only color that's in here, as long as it's dark enough to contrast with that white chart background, which is why we don't want any other colors in the background. As long as it's contrasting enough, then it's going to be fine. Green is not inaccessible. It only becomes inaccessible when we combine it with red because that's the most common form of color blindness, but we're not doing that here. What other fonts can be used? Any kind of condensed font. You're gonna want to be looking for something that's like tall and skinny. When you look for an O, it should look like an oval, not like a circle. That's your clue. You have a condensed font. And there are going to be many that are in your like default drop-down list. But again, go with what like something really close to what the guidelines say. So if they say Arial, you go Arial narrow. Okay, let's move on to the next chart. And we're certainly going to be back in that Excel and we'll be answering more questions shortly. So I wanted to go on to figure 9.5. Look at this, Brad. How are you getting away with publishing 3D pie charts like this? How have you made it this far? Like, it's a testament to your knowledge, your wisdom, and your skills, because people haven't fired you for this yet. Good for you for having talent that surpasses the bad charts. But see, look, he can handle it. So you can give comments into the chat. All right, you do it now. What would you want to fix about this? Give Brad a suggestion. I just hurt his feelings. You come back with, might we suggest something like that? Marianne, change it to a bar chart. Fabiana said the colors. Good. What would you do with the colors? Michelle said at least make it 2D. Good. Give me more. It is, Marcia, right? It's hard to differentiate the patterns, that's for sure. Yeah, we're going to get rid of all those textures. Okay, well, let's head over and start that. Using uniform colors and not with lines. Yes, okay, good. So I think one of our abilities here, see, we get ourselves into a really tricky place when we use pie charts because we have all these wedges touching each other, which means they have to be distinguished from their neighbor. And so that's why you end up using all these different patterns or like all these different colors. And even if it was like multicolor instead of just green, it would look kind of chaotic with so many colors in it. And that might be difficult for the journal to reproduce if it was going to be in black and white. But as soon as we change this to a different chart type, we're going to get ourselves out of that situation altogether. I think this is going to be better as a bar chart. Now, there are other chart types that we could use too. But for now, we're just going to change this to a basic bar chart. Is thinking about it. We'll try that one more time. This is going to be, okay, so it's not a pretty looking bar chart, but we're going to get ourselves there, okay? Yes, Sarah, exactly. We'd want to change the order in here. And so that's going to be a huge move that will make this whole thing more readable. Let me clean up some other stuff before we do that, because it's just really hard for me to even look at this. So it's added in those data labels right now, but we've already got the regions repeated over here on the what's now a y-axis. So I'm just going to delete those labels for now. And I'm going to add in that condensed font. That's going to help us. You can tell we need it because some of the words are getting cut off here with like the 3 dots, you know. A condensed font will help. That didn't totally fix it. So I'm just going to drag in the plot area a little bit over here on the side until I can see all the words and no trailing dots. And then, yeah, let's do Sarah's idea and let's order it. So we have to do the ordering back in the spreadsheet. You just highlight the rows that have that data. We'll go to sort and filter, and we're going to go down to custom sort. And we'll sort by, we're going to sort by geocont. Okay, well, we're going to sort by column B. We're going to sort on the cell values. And generally speaking, we want our bar charts to go greatest to least. But the thing about Excel is that it secretly hates you. So it's going to graph your data in the opposite order that you have it sorted in your spreadsheet. So we're going to actually keep the order smallest to largest so that it shows up in the chart largest to smallest. So we're just going to click OK. That's so much better. While we're here, why don't we just fix the spelling of Africa? You can't get published like that. Okay. Excellent. Now that we have it in this shape, what would we do next? It's already so much better. What's our next move? Yasmin says the colors, yes. So let's go over to the paint bucket here. And we don't need different colors because the bars aren't touching each other. One color is going to be totally fine. So inside fill, we'll just go to solid fill. And I think you were picking this green. Yeah. We don't need a border on our charts either. Yeah, you're right, Merv. We don't need that. So I'm just going to go down to border and say no line. And that gets us here looking pretty good. The one thing that you might not notice at first about Excel bar charts is that they're really skinny bars. They're like these little skinny, wimpy looking bars. But we can make them look a lot thicker and bigger and more beautiful. And it is in the same format data series menu in this last icon. I'm just going to adjust the gap width. The gap width controls the width of the gap between 2 bars. So if your gap width is really small, your bars are going to get really thick. And that's the thing showing the data. It's what people want to see. So it should look big and beautiful. And yeah, let's add the data points on this one. So I'm going to right click and say add data labels. Because we have the data labels, I'm going to delete the value axis and I'm going to delete the grid lines. Now, why are these data labels blue? No idea, but we're going to go to the font colors and either choose black, or we could even maybe choose the green and have it match the bar color if the journal would let you get away with that. I think we're in good shape. I believe we have to take out the chart border here as well, and we're going to need a title that says something. Sarah, yeah, I was wondering if it was my computer and my eyes, or if there was in fact a shadow behind the bars. There is. So we're going to click on those bars and go into shadow, and we'll make it say no shadow. There we go. Okay. I was like, I'm just getting old. Okay. Is there a typo with Australia? Australasia, I think, is a common, is a known name for like that general region of the world. I think that one's okay. Anything else? Oh yeah, we need a title. So what would the title be? We'd want to go back to the article and take a look at what you were saying about it. Let's take a look. So we've got geolocation of lead authors of citing publications. That's the caption, which you could still have that as the caption if you wanted to. But perhaps we can find something more useful in here. Like most articles are published in North America, or almost 20% were published in Europe. Let's do that. Okay. Who's got any more suggestions for this one? I don't know why this isn't all caps, but so it goes. So now this is an example of where my title went down and did 2 lines, which is okay. I'm just going to left justify it. And I'm going to make the subtitle a little smaller, maybe gray. And the main title should likely be in black. Fabiana said, is it okay to use a general title? Well, if you're asking me, no, because people want to know the story in your data and you're the one who knows it the best. They do not want to have to do their own labor to figure out what the story is. They want to know what you think. That's why they are reading your article. And then they want to see the evidence that supports that claim you're making up at the top. So you have a title that tells the story, and then you have that evidence down below. If you feel the need for that old school, more generic title, then make that your subtitle. Tim said text indicates the percent, but the chart has numbers. Are percents better than numbers? It can go back and forth. I mean, you know this from a data analysis perspective. You know, you want to talk in numbers, not percentages. If you have a small n, like you shouldn't be making percentages out of small n's. But I think the n is big enough here that you could go with percentages. So either way. Yasmin said, is it worth it to use divergent colors for the bars? We'd have to figure out a reason why, like why we would use different colors in here. As long as there's some justified reason for it, then yes, you could do it. Sarah says, since this article said Europe with UK, and then maybe say Europe and UK combined and change the color of just those two, sure, we could. So we could put the rest of the bars, we could put all the bars like in a gray. And then we could click on Europe and change that one to green. And maybe we could click on UK and change that one to green if that's what we're referring to here. One thing to be mindful of, if you're going to do that, we need black numbers. You'd want to pick a gray that's like medium gray, like not too dark, because if it's reprinted in black and white, it needs to still look different from the dark green that you're using, but also not too light of a gray because it needs to hold up against the white chart background. So like a medium gray and then a darker green. Brad said, I thought I learned many years ago that when the values are up to 100, a pie chart is preferable. Yeah, exactly. That is an old thing. Yep, that's all. It's just like an old line of reasoning that we just don't use anymore. Because this is representing you so much better. And if you really needed to, you could say, these data sum to 100%, but I don't really think that's necessary. I think it's looking fine. Any further suggestions on this one? How are you doing, Brad? Are you okay? Okay, good. Okay, let's look. There's one more I wanted to check out here. Oh, we're doing okay on time. All right. The next one we're going to go to is 9.8. And Brad, the recommendations that we're making here, you're going to be able to use on any of the charts that are here. So yeah, good. Take those notes and you'll apply them to the figures that we're not working on together. Okay, so this is a great example. 9.8 is a great example of why we can never use 3D. Because I want you to check out the bar. Sorry, this would technically be a column for 2 or more contributions. Do you see how that label says it's 5.8 as the value? But the column itself is actually visibly below the grid line for 5. So how does that even make sense? And this is why we never use 3D. Okay? You're going to type that into the chat right now. And Brad, you're going to start. You're going to type into the chat right now. I will not use 3D. Let's see it. And then everybody else is going to follow suit. This is the most fun I've had in a workshop in a long time. Thanks, Brad, for being such a good sport about it. We're all eyeballs on the chat, and so we see that Brad has typed it in. Did I miss it? We're waiting.
You missed it. I said 3D is now in my rear view mirror.
Okay, perfect. Good. That didn't come to me, but I will assume that everybody else can see it and it's out there. Thank you. I appreciate that. You're setting the role model for the rest of us. Okay, so we're for sure going to take 3D out of this thing. What else would you want to do to this? Head to the chat, give me some suggestions. Some of it's going to be the same moves we've been making so far, right? Yeah, remove that pattern. Ooh, potentially round the numbers. Yeah. And Merv, so this is a great question. Okay. So whether we keep a decimal point or not is really about our audience. Like sometimes if you're talking to like a researchy, sciencey crowd and you have rounded, they're like, oh, this person is so inaccurate. But so reporting to 1 decimal place can be a good choice for that crowd. Sometimes decimals, when you're talking to the public, they're like, oh, you nerd, like it's just too much for them. So this is why you have to know who your audience is. That will tell you whether you should round or whether you should leave a decimal. Solid color, no border, only keep the major axis. Let's start making these changes. Where are we? Scrolling in the wrong direction. Here we go. Okay. So we have to change this whole chart type. It's because we have to go to a 2D bar. A 2D column, technically speaking. Let's just make these solid fill. We'll take out the border around those columns as well. And then are we thinking keep the data labels and ditch the y-axis and the grid lines? This is a whole lot of grid lines in here too. Or do you want to keep the axis and the grid lines and ditch the data labels? Somebody give me a vote in the chat. Which one should we do? Because we can't keep both. Keep data labels and add percent signs. All right. Let's delete all the rest of this. You definitely don't need an axis label that says percentage. So to add in percent signs and other programs, there are other ways that you can do it, but here in Excel, we just have to go back to the spreadsheet and add them that way. These little lines that connect the label to the column, unnecessary, those are going to be called leader lines, and they appear when you, or in this case, Brad, manually moved the label where you wanted it to go instead of just letting Excel do the work for you. So when we add our data labels onto our columns, we can change, we have got options in here, inside label position. Center, we'll put them in the center of the column, and that is probably never going to be the best idea. Inside base, put them all the way down at the bottom of the column. Also not a great idea because it's the end of the column that's really telling us the value. So we want to put the number on the part that is telling us like exactly what that value is. So inside end or outside end. But if you just use these buttons instead of moving it yourself, then it's not going to give you those lines. We got an extra decimal in here when we were making those changes. So I'm just going to pop down to number right here and change this to percentage. And take out the 2 and just put a 1 in there. So much better. We do have a chart border on here, so I'm going to take that out. And then I think we're pretty close. We could use a condensed font on this one as well. And we only have 4 categories that we're graphing, so the whole chart could actually be more narrow. The Excel is always going to give you that 3" by 5" by default, but you don't have to use that. So I'm just going to make the whole thing more narrow. We could even handle the gap width a little bit on this one too and make the columns a bit thicker. And then we'll create a title, and the title or the subtitle is going to have to incorporate something about how we're looking at quality scores. So maybe we'll put that in the subtitle. That way we can take it out of the y-axis down here. Brad, what do you think would be a good title for this one? We want it to be a whole sentence. Also, while you're thinking about that, I want you all to notice, I probably didn't articulate this earlier, but that chart title, I am moving all the way to the upper left corner of the graph space. Typically in Excel, they're going to default to having that label centered in the middle of your chart, but we don't read stuff that's centered very easily. We are a top to bottom, left to right reading culture. So we want to move that chart title to the upper left. That's why it's also going to be left justified, because that's how we like reading. So what would be a good title for this one?
Well, you know, it's about impact quality, but I'm trying to think of, you're talking about trying to highlight, you know, the main pattern that tells a story. To me, the biggest thing here is almost 15% were integrated applications.
Okay, great. Okay. Now, this is pretty large text. I'm sure that ultimately the journal is going to have guidance for you about how large they want your titles to be. The subtitle will be a little bit smaller. And if we're going to highlight one particular section in here on integrated applications, let's just make the rest of this gray. Let's put integrated applications into that nice dark green. And then we can do a little bit of color coding up here in the title too and make that dark green. This part of the journal is probably going to be like, are you kidding me? Get that color out of the title. But outside of the journal, you can definitely incorporate some strategies like this.
The quality scores are from 1 to 4, by the way, not 40.
1 to 4.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. There we go. All right. Yukun said I would integrate the 3 bars to the right in 1 bar to contrast with the first one that says passive mention. Yeah, that would totally be an option that you could do depending on the story you're trying to tell, especially if your story was about passive mention, then sure, it makes sense that you might want to group the rest of them together. So Brad's looking at this and he's seeing one particular story, and that would be the justification for the arrangement that we have right now. But I want you to keep that filter on, because if you're looking at your own story and you're like, well, it's really only about this one part, let me aggregate these others, that's absolutely a tool you have in your toolbox. Cool. Okay. Well, those were our 3 redesigns of Brad's work. Brad got roasted along the way, mostly by me. I completely take responsibility for that. So let's give him another pat on the back for dealing with me and being willing to put his own work up there in the first place. So give him a shout, give him a thanks, give him a hand.
Thanks very much. It's not the first time I've been roasted, by the way. One question I have, like with the titles, the way that you represent them, I understand the reason for that. We're telling a story and you want people to be drawn to that story. But you have to also connect with the text. So we always go, you know, figure 9.8 or something. Should we put that in there, figure 9.8 somewhere, so they connect the text with the actual?
Yeah, so it can look a couple different ways. Yes. So you can still have, like in your paper, you have the figure like this, the citation or the caption down below, and you could keep that if you wanted to, especially if that's the way that the journal is asking for it. But another way that I would do that is I would actually use this title space. And I would do something like this, figure 9.8, and just label it right up here as part of the title. I like to put it on its own line. I like to make it small, and I like to make it gray, maybe bold though. And the reason I want it to look that way is because the figure number is just like a journey marker. It's just a reference point. It is not nearly as important as that title, as that main idea and that story that you're trying to tell. So that's why I like putting it on its own line and first, so that you can spot it when you're like, ooh, scanning for where's figure 9.8. But it's kind of also out of the way so that you can just jump right into your point. As a reader, that's what I really want to see, you know? So this could be a way to do it, or just stick with that traditional caption down below the chart if that's what your journal is like demanding.
I'm going to try to abandon traditional.
See what you can get away with and report back. We'd love to know.
Okay.
Give me more questions. Yeah, a little bit more time here. I see a hand up, Jennifer.
Yeah, I have a question about the second one that we did. So the title has the percentage of the articles that were published, whereas the markers have like the number. So isn't that a little bit of like mental gymnastics that the reader then has to do, of like trying to figure out how to do like the math in their brain? So wouldn't it make sense to either do them all in percentages so that the title matches, or make the titles use raw numbers?
Yeah, you could. Yeah, I copied that text directly out of the surrounding text that would go around this figure, where it's all being discussed in percentages. So we should like pick one way or the other here, like raw numbers or percentages. So if the surrounding text is going to be percentage, maybe that's reason here to convert these all to percentages. I have seen folks try to do a little bit of both, like number and percent. And one of the ways that you can do that, that's like the least obnoxious, is if you change up your category labels. So over here in your Excel sheet, where instead of just saying USA, we might actually incorporate the N. So we do USA, and especially since this is the first one, we'd say N equals 170. And then that's going to incorporate itself into the y-axis here. And then we could change these all to percentages. Then you'd have the N and you'd have the percent. When you go down to the next one for Europe, you don't need to add the N because we already said it in the first one. So we would just put 68 in parentheses. Does that make sense? So this could be a way to kind of do both. Good question.
Thank you.
Yeah. Merv.
Hi, Stephanie. I think my question probably relates more to what to present, especially when you have a really big data set and everything seems interesting. Do you have any tips on what to select?
Yeah, so I am an audience first person. I would think what's going to be the most interesting to my audience out of this data. Like I might find many things fascinating, but I'm a nerd and my audience may not be as big of a nerd about the topic as I am. So I'm going to go from their perspective. What's going to be the most surprising, interesting, and people can only, we have to keep in mind how much people are going to be able to retain and digest, and the magic number is 3. Plus or minus a little bit, but I would think about like the top 3 most important things they need to know. Or at least start with that, and then you can like maybe discuss in more detail later on. But I would begin with like the top 3 things. Or if you have a data set that's like, all the countries in the world, I would begin truncating it to like the top 10 countries that blank, edit it down a little bit, one way or the other. Good question. I am loving all the cats and the babies that I'm seeing in the backgrounds of your Zooms. So keep that up. Let me come back to some of these questions. His pie only had 3, his pie chart was only 3 sections. Would you let him keep it? Bless you. This one. Yeah, I'm not gonna be mad at it. But it can't be 2D. We all already swore that it will never be 3D. Oh my gosh. Okay, let's just make it a 2D pie. And then the thing about pies is that we still want to be thinking about a greatest to least situation. So I'd want to reorder this so that empirical is at the top. So we're going to sort on. Column B, smallest to largest. Okay, well, thanks, Excel. It does the opposite of what you want half the time, doesn't it? It's just like so Excel-ish. Okay. You want the largest to smallest, and you want your largest slice starting at noon, and then the order going clockwise around the circle, because that best matches on to the mental models we already have about how to read circles, like clocks. Of course, you want to stick the labels inside and take out the patterns and stuff, but yes, you could keep this one because it only has 3 sections. Fabiana, do you know what training we can take to improve visual skills? You should take my trainings. So I've got a Data Visualization Academy that has hundreds of tutorials on how to make charts like this and how to tell your story. We have tutorials that focus on Excel, Tableau, Power BI, R. We've even got some stuff that's in like Google Sheets or PowerPoint. My whole thing is just use whatever tool you have on your computer, but know how to use it really, really well to tell the story. So the Data Viz Academy, you should check into that. Thanks for setting me up with that question. Sarah, are there other big errors folks make when creating charts that we didn't cover today that you can highlight for us? I think we hit the big ones. Your title, and I'll be more explicit about this, your audience. You have to be thinking about, what does my audience want to see? Because it's often completely different from what you think you would want, because you have that curse of knowledge. You know too much about the topic. So we have to get ourselves out of that and think from our audience's point of view. Choosing the right chart type and adjusting colors, those things are always going to be good. Journals are frugal about the number of figures in an article. Yes. Which figures would you sacrifice if your journal only allows 1 or 2? So I think this relates to Murph's question. I would go with, from my audience's point of view, what is the most surprising or important thing? Or, if you want to think about it from your point of view, like if people were going to tweet, if you're about to go viral with this article, and they only have 1 image to include on the tweet, what would be the money image? Like, that's what you need to be thinking about. And so, pick that one, and then you can go to a few more from there, I suppose. I hope that helps. Yasmin said, unrelated to Brad's visualizations, phew, he's like, yes, for a second here. I struggle with visualizing one number, like number of citations, when there are no other data points to compare it to, but I'd like to emphasize it in a report. Yeah, that is the hardest task, is just to be given like a number with 0 context, because people are meaning makers. So they're looking for the meaning, and one number doesn't have it. We add meaning by having history. So like a trend. We add meaning by having comparisons to something important like a benchmark. If you don't have any of that, then you just have a number. And it's really hard. If it's literally a number and not a percent, like if it's a percent, you could always maybe do like a donut with just like 1 wedge, or you could do an icon array that's like got a certain number of them filled up. But if it's truly just a number, I know it can get a little bit tricky because you don't know what to do with it. An easy thing to do might be to add an icon. Like, so if it was number of citations, maybe there's some kind of cute icon about a report or a book or a page or something that we could use just to like go next to the number so that it catches your eye a little bit. But I agree, that is like the hardest graphic design task, is coming up with what to do with just a number. Yeah. Brad, I see your hand up.
Stephanie, these are really great ideas, and obviously you've internalized a lot of this. There's a set of principles, I'm guessing, about data visualization. I think you've published on that. Is there a research or evidence base to the principles that underlie data visualization? Do people do studies on this kind of stuff?
They do, yes. I'm going to drop a link into the chat right now. So this set of principles that we pulled together into the data visualization checklist has been well studied. It originally came from my dissertation research and also just like what I was seeing in like practical experience. But then it got tested for validity and reliability. Like I've had grad students do the dissertation on this checklist to continue to look at it. But that's the thing, like back when I was developing this checklist, we didn't really have a field of research like in data viz as like we weren't really a field. So there wasn't like a body of research yet, but more and more continues to come out that just validates this stuff. So the data viz checklist is a really good place to begin. But my books are all well researched. Sage is the publisher, they kind of require that. So there are tons of resources, like actual references in there. And more that come out all the time. There's a well-known conference, IEEE, that publishes a ton of research on data viz. So if you're like ready to get into the weeds, that's a good place to go. It used to be that Twitter was where people would publish their research, especially in data viz. The community there has been very strong, but ever since Elon Musk took over, things have been kind of weird. Do I have time to handle a few more questions, Brad? Okay, cool. I see one in here from Marianne. What would be your recommendations for data visualization software or tools, especially low-cost options? So I mainly use Excel, Marianne, and the reason that I do that is because so much of the world is using Microsoft. And so, I can learn Tableau. I know Power BI, but when I make it and then I give it to my client, they don't know how to do anything with it. They don't know how to fix it. They have to come back to me if there's a typo. No, you do not need to come back to me if there is a typo. So I work in the Microsoft world because that's where everybody else is. So like I said, use whatever tools you have, just learn how to use them really well. Like in the education world, they're all on the Google platform. So I hold workshops with education folks who are just doing all of this in Google Sheets. And there are limitations there. There are limitations in every single software. But the reason that people love it so much, the reason it's so popular is because it's so free. So, I would say, don't focus so much on the tool, though you should just pick one, focus more on the design principles, and then you'll be able to figure out how to apply them no matter what tool you're working in. Megan, how would you approach a chart that would print it in black and white without using patterns? So this one I think could be a little bit tricky because the pie wedges are all touching each other, but what if we only need 3 shades, right? So one will be black. The next one we're going to make like a light gray or medium gray. And then this pie wedge is going to be like a lighter gray. Thanks, Excel. Let's try that one more time. So I think, and honestly, for some of the other charts that we made, you don't need to worry about it being reprinted in black and white. But when you are thinking about that, you just want to be thinking about what color contrast will ultimately look like. And the thing is, when you use the DataViz checklist that I dropped into the chat here, we have a checkpoint that says you need to look good in black and white too. And we've got a filter that we'll put on your visual so that you can see what it will look like in black and white reprinting conditions. And there's a filter in there to test your chart for color blindness. So that way you're like, okay, I know I got this for sure. So yeah, like a grayscale. That's right, Megan. And Brad, is your hand up again or is it still up?
It's up again.
Okay.
A lot of us are working with qualitative data and mixed methods. And I'm just wondering, there's a lot of people who, it's all about data reduction. How do we represent qualitative data in charts and so on? I'm just wondering if you've had any experience with that, or is it all quantitative data?
No, in fact, we have the largest collection of qualitative data viz that anybody's ever heard of. So I'll drop a link into the chat. I just posted a blog. I just wrote a blog about this like a month ago, and it's the 3 must-know qualitative charts. I'll bring this over so that you can see it. Yeah, so I love the heat map. I love the spectrum display. I think this is so cool. In fact, I was teaching a group at NSF, the National Science Foundation here in the US, about how to make this chart, which is done entirely inside Excel. And they were like, oh my God, this is like solving all the problems I didn't know how to graph. This is how I need to graph it. And there are more in here too, gauge charts. So these are 3 of my favorites, but I've got a qualitative chart chooser. So if you just come to my site and you search on the qualitative chart chooser, I'll like send it to you, and it's got the whole collection.
Nice, thank you very much.
It's a good question. I see, Rachel, I see your question here. Can you provide us with 5 quick tips to take home on how to best improve data visualizations? I think this is what we've already kind of talked about again, but like a great thing for us to end on, right? Have a great title that tells your story. Take out all the unnecessary lines. Put your audience first, like what do they need to see here? Choose the right chart type, which I know can be easier said than done. And think about your colors. I think those would be the 5. All doable in here. And this was all recorded, so you can go back and review exactly how I got to those menus if you need to. Yay, this was so fun.
Well, I'm glad you had fun. I had a lot of fun as well, Stephanie. If it was a roast, it was not very painful. It was actually a lot of fun to go through that. And I learned a lot. I took a lot of notes, and I think the chapter we're working on there will see some interesting revisions. So I want to thank you very much on behalf of everybody. Maybe we can all give a little applause.